It never happens at a good time. The pipe bursts at midnight. The heater quits on the coldest night. Suddenly, you're overwhelmed. That's when HomeServe is here. For $4.99 a month, you're never alone. Just call their 24/7 hotline and a local pro is on the way. Trusted by millions, HomeServe delivers peace of mind when you need it most. For plans starting at just $4.99 a month, go to homeserve.com. That's homeserve.com. Not available everywhere. Most plans range between $4.99 to $11.99 a month your first year. Terms apply on covered repairs.
When we're looking at how we're creating successful environments, whether that is a sports team, whether that is an organization, whether that is an entrepreneur, whether that's a family or a community, we actually need a neuroscience lens, because what people typically call culture problems, they're actually brain problems.
Welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom, where we share pearls of wisdom shared by some of the world's top entrepreneurs, leaders, and difference makers. Here's your host, Govind Jayaraman.
Hi, I'm Govind Jayaraman, and this is Paper Napkin Wisdom, episode 347. You know, sometimes the most powerful ideas don't arrive as long reports or polished presentations. Sometimes they arrive scribbled on a paper napkin, a simple sketch that quietly captures something profound about how the world really works. And I think this conversation is one of those moments. Because when today's guest handed me her napkin, the very first line really grabbed my attention. Belonging is the science you can feel. So just think about that for a moment. Belonging is not a slogan, not as a soft concept or not as a buzzword, but as something biological, something measurable, something that lives inside our physiology and nervous systems. Because if you've ever walked into a room and instantly felt like you belonged, you probably noticed how your shoulders relaxed and your mind opened and your ideas just flowed. And if you've ever walked into a room where you felt that you didn't belong, you probably noticed something else entirely. Your brain started scanning, your body tightened, and your energy shifted from performance to protection. And what if those environments that we create in business, in teams, in our families determine which of those two modes people around us live in? And that's exactly what today's guest has spent years researching. Andrea Carter is a performance coach, a researcher, and a thought leader whose work sits at the intersection of neuroscience, leadership, and organizational culture. Through her research with thousands of employees across multiple industries, she has uncovered something absolutely fascinating. What we often call culture problems are actually brain problems. On her napkin, Andrea outlines 5 measurable indicators that determine whether or not people experience belonging, and therefore whether or not they can truly perform at their best. Comfort, connection, contribution, psychological safety, and well-being. 5 elements that work together and form what she calls the performance infrastructure. Because when those elements are present, people don't just work harder, they think clearer. They collaborate better, they innovate faster, and stay longer. And when they're missing, well, even the most talented people struggle. So today, Andrea and I explore the science behind belonging, the environments that unlock human potential, and the leadership practices that allow people to bring their full selves and abilities to the work and spaces they are in. So as you listen, you might begin to notice something interesting. You might start thinking about the teams that you've been a part of, the environments in which you thrived, and the ones where something just felt a little off. And you might even begin to wonder what small shift could create the kind of environment where everyone can perform at their best. Let's dive in. Andrea Carter, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. I'm excited to have you with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Govind. It's exciting to be here and talk about paper napkin wisdom.
Well, you know, I got to say, you used a big napkin, and there's a lot of material. You got a big brain, so you know, Dr. Carter, I should say. So there's a lot here that for us to cover. And usually, the bit is that I read the paper napkin and I ask people why they shared it with me. But there's so much here that I think I'd like to explore it with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
And one of the things that I really love at the top, though, is belonging is the science you can feel. And I'll bet you there's a clue in that as to why you picked neuroscience as a discipline too. So why did you share that with me?
Yeah. So I started my career as a performance coach. I started working with athletes, then moved into working with executives and leaders who were struggling to hit their potential. And what always fascinated me about these brilliant, talented people was that there was always some sort of block. And what was fascinating from that perspective was that it wasn't necessarily a block within them. Themselves, right? So it was actually a lot of times that there was a mismatch between themselves and the environment. And I kept asking, why are these capable people, these special people, unable to perform in this specific environment? And the answer was never about skill gaps or motivation. It was always about the environment that they were operating in. And so 11 years ago, I was doing a lot of gender diversity work, and I was really seeing clear patterns where women weren't failing because they lacked competence. They were failing because the system they were in was signaling, you don't belong here. And so what's fascinating about that is that when the brain experiences you don't belong here, the brain responds to that as a threat. And what I realized was that when we're looking at how we're creating successful environments, whether that is a sports team, whether that is an organization, whether that is an entrepreneur, whether that's a family or a community, we actually need a neuroscience lens, because what people typically call culture problems, they're actually brain problems. And when you are in an environment that signals threat, your brain is going to go into protection mode no matter who you are. Cortisol will rise. You spend energy on self-protection rather on quality, speed, and performance. And that's not a mindset issue. That's biochemistry.
Okay, that's a mouthful. There's a lot. There's so much there, Andrea. I want to literally, we could spend 3 hours just talking about what you just shared, because I'm very passionate about all of these subjects. And I just love the bomb you dropped at the end, that if belonging is not present, if safety is not present, protection becomes the priority over performance. And that's just chemical, that's biological, that's how our brains are wired to function. And it sounds so simple when you make it one sentence, but holy crap, it's not simple, isn't it?
No. I mean, organizations tell me all the time, they're like, we want engagement, we want retention, we want innovation. But then they are treating culture and the environment like a side project, or like something HR does when there's budget, or something that you can cut when times get tough,
cupcake
right?
carts and
Yes.
and pizza days, and we checked all the boxes. What are you talking about, right?
Yeah, so I'm here basically shifting that narrative and really showing them the science behind belonging, which is when you're treating performance infrastructure like it's optional, you're going to continue to fail with culture. Belonging isn't soft. It's not a nice to have. It's the science you can feel. And when it's missing, you as the people in the environment feel it in their nervous systems before they can actually articulate it into words.
Okay, why did you pick this as a discipline for you? Like, how did you get passionate about this?
Well, a couple of reasons. So when I first started, I had done a research project 11 years ago investigating DEI and whether DEI was going to bring people together or polarize people. And the research 11 years ago showed that it would polarize people. And so that was kind of what initially tipped me into, okay, and now please also understand, I believe in DEI. In Canada, we call it IDEA, inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. Accessibility has to be there as well. I believe in that work. What I feel is important, though, is that if we don't have the infrastructure set up, it actually can't allow for differences to truly be present. present, if I could speak clearly here, what happens is that only certain ideas or only certain differences.
A curated set makes it true,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. And so what happened was when I went back and did my my dissertation on belonging in the workplace, and that was back in 2000 to 2022. It was right in the height of COVID. My son, who is neurodiverse, was going through a really hard time. We had moved into a new area, and he was targeted because not only was he super tall, so I'm 6 feet, my husband's 6'10", my son is now 18, and
Most people don't realize how much of their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making millions pulling details about you from public records and the internet, then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, all backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might just sell credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/hidden. Protect yourself now at aura.com/hidden.
and 6'8". He was that kid that couldn't stand out, but as a neurodivergent kid, you're often targeted if you have an extra difference. So these intersections of identity that actually bring us in or draw us out are really the foundation of what is real belonging. And what I found in that minute where he was targeted, and at one point he was beaten, and at one point he was suicidal, and it was horrific. What I understood from our experience, and these were well-to-do families, it didn't matter that it was not this element of people thinking, oh, it's just because you're in this neighborhood or you're in the, people always put conditions around what DEI is. And really at the underneath perspective, it's whether or not you can go into an environment and feel threat, or whether you can go into an environment and you are at peace and your brain can actually think clearly. And so when I started looking at, what the data was showing, I was listening to what people were saying in the workplace, in families, in communities. And at that time, the epidemic of loneliness and the epidemic of estrangement and the epidemic of canceling people had really just begun. And so what we found was that I knew, based on the conversations that I was having and the heartbreak that I was going through with my son, that something needed to change. Because when we look at how we build spaces for people to succeed, not just a certain few should succeed. And we're seeing that in the world stage today. We're seeing that in our political and our economical elements. And when we look at the organizations that are thriving, the people who are thriving, they don't thrive on their own. You're not in a silo. We have an interdependence where we need other people. And so that was kind of where I went back and looked at, okay, so if inclusion isn't going to do it, what do people actually need? And it really started with what belonging is, because belonging, just like drinking, just like eating, is a human necessity. We'll die without it. And so when I looked at the science, what I found was that there really wasn't anything that allowed us to measure belonging. And there wasn't anything that actually indicated what belonging really was. It was all around what a feeling was. And so that's where the research started. That's where the publications started, the dissertations started, so that I could look at, from that experience, personal, community, workplaces I was in. My research started with 3,500 people in 13 different Toronto Stock Exchange mining companies. So let's think about that. And now it's evolved into 8 different industries, 150,000 plus employees. And what was fascinating was that words matter, language matter. So those 5 indicators, if we switch gears and get a little bit more into the paper napkin again, really came down to the fact that the brain, for us to feel belonging, there's 5 indicators that we need. And they are comfort, connection, contribution, psychological safety, and well-being. And you can measure those in reality, not as theory, not just as vision statements, but in how decisions are made, how leaders show up, how people stay supported, engaged, systems are designed.
So one of the things that you've got to, and look, if you're just listening to this, you're going to want to go onto the website, take a look at the paper napkin, and listen again or read the blog or both, because there's a really dynamic model here that we're going to talk through, but there's a lot of information. And I want to go back to one thing before we go through the model, because I think this is really important. I think a lot of people are looking at how to get more out of their teams, looking more at how to get, and this is, a lot of people are trying to operationalize efficiency. They're looking for optimization everywhere they go. And most of the time, we're implementing systems and processes to measure things better, to improve things better, but not really equip our people with more skill. And I think that people are the unused multiplier in this equation. And what you have done is flip it, I think, because what you observed through your early mining of the mining data in mining companies was that it was always about the environment. It was the performance issues were always about the environment, because the environment is what makes people feel safe. And I think this is I think so some people are going to listen to DEI and inclusion information, and they're instantly going to get rankled, because it is a possibly divisive subject and polarizing subject, and you identified that, right? You identified that with your early work. And the reality is, as leaders, we can be rankled by it all we want. It is our role to provide a safe container for our people so that they can become who they really are with us. Right? Not
Agreed.
for us, but with us. Am I right?
Yeah. Govin, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And I think, there's lots of big fancy names. Servant leadership, right? Like, we could go into all of the different types of leadership there is, but really at the end of the day, and this is what I learned early from my performance work that I was doing with CFL teams and players. I worked with a lot of guys who were on these Cinderella teams, the teams that weren't supposed to win. And what I always learned was that those teams didn't have all A players. They had A, B, and C players. The difference was that they valued everyone, and everybody had a role, and everybody was giving 50% belonging to someone, and they were receiving 50% belonging. And it doesn't always work 50-50, but that's one of the key ingredients, is that, you can't create a belonging environment without looking at what you're giving and what you're receiving. And what we see is the difference between fitting in and belonging, right? If you're fitting in, that means 100% of the responsibility and accountability is on you. And if you don't make the cut of what the environment deems acceptable, then you don't get to be a contributing member. You might still be there, you might still be included, but nobody actually really thinks about you and considers you.
Let's dispel something for us, like a millisecond, because I think it's really important, 6 foot tall Andrea with 6'10" husband, to say that you're in a professional football environment. These are not unathletic, unphysically imposing individuals. I mean, these are big men, big, strong men who train their entire lives to do big, strong things, and belonging mattered to them.
Yeah.
Right?
And belonging
let's-
still matters today. My son, who's now playing football at 18 at Laurier University, that's one of their foundational
It's a great
elements.
program. It's a great program. Yeah. So, but think about this. We're talking about big, strong men. We're not just talking about, DEI, people who are at the edges of society. We're talking big, strong men need belonging too. So this is universal.
Universal.
Isn't it?
Well, and that was a lot of what showed up in the original mining work was that, we left a lot of people out of the conversation when DEI work first started. And that was one of the big things that came in through the research was that, if you were a male, for example, you may still not feel that you belonged, but you were expected to just be the leader of belonging or the leader of culture without actually feeling like you were part of it either. And so that's really where the science came from, because so many people during the initial rollout of DEI work felt silenced. And I think regardless of how you think about DEI or idea, I think the element that comes forward is how do we create the environments where everyone can succeed and actually feel that they're important. And so if we look at each of those indicators, I think it's easiest if we kind of dig into some of those next, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I think what.
Mm-hmm.
So are you suggesting that we go to the napkin now? Because I think that it logically says that your first step.
Shipping, billing, admin, payroll, marketing. You're managing all the things. So why waste time sending important documents the old-fashioned way? Mail and ship when you want, how you want with Stamps.com. Print postage on demand 24/7 and schedule pickups from your office or home. Save up to 90% with automated rate shopping. That's why over 1 million small businesses trust Stamps.com. Go to Stamps.com and use code PODCAST to try Stamps.com risk-free for 60 days.
Up is comfort, right? And I know you don't mean putting couches on every floor, making sure there's more cupcakes and beanbag chairs for people to fall asleep on. I know that's not what you're talking about. So when you say that we start with comfort, what do you mean?
Yeah, so let's talk. I'm going to speak in very relatable language, if that's okay with you. So listeners, you've probably felt this, where you've walked into, maybe it's a meeting where you had no idea why you were there, or there was,
no one's ever been in one of those.
Right? Or there was a decision that was being made, or you didn't know if you were supposed to speak up or whether you were supposed to stay quiet. You spend the entire meeting and you're kind of scanning the room like, I'm reading emotional temperature. I'm reading cues. I'm trying to figure out all the unspoken rules. And by the time the meeting ends, you're exhausted, not from the work or the meeting itself, but from this cognitive load of uncertainty. And so that's your brain in threat mode. That's where your cortisol levels, they're elevated. Your nervous system is working overtime. And zero energy is going toward actual contribution or actual elements where you are in your best working mind. And so, when it's present, when belonging is present, imagine this. So a meeting starts and the meeting already had an agenda that you received beforehand. And then the meeting starts and you go, okay, so here's why we're here. Here's what you need to decide collectively. And here's how your input is going to shape that outcome. Those aren't terribly hard questions to ask, but when they're asked immediately, your shoulders drop, your brain stops scanning for threat. You can actually think about what the problem is instead of managing anxiety or managing, whether or not somebody is going to be reactive or defensive. That's comfort. That's not about eliminating conflict or challenge. It's about creating clarity and predictability so that your nervous system can rest and your energy can go towards you performing. From a visceral
I think it's so
perspective.
important
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I don't want to leave because you went through those 3 points really quickly, but I think it's so important that you included, here's how your feedback can be incorporated in what we do moving forward. That's a step that's very often missed. Like the it's sort of like the universal transcoder that is missing from the equation, right? Like, yes, this is how you listen to me. That leaders are pretty good at that, but here's how I can receive your feedback, or here's how the team can receive your feedback. That's something that's often missed, and it's not a big deal to share, is it?
No, no. And
Can you
even
give
if
me an
you think
example of
about
what that
those,
could look like?
sorry?
What would that look like? In like, how would you communicate that as an example?
Well, it can be as simple as just stating those three things. Those three statements at the beginning of a meeting. Here's why we're here. Here's what we need to decide. Here's how your input will shape the outcome. Those are three very basic questions or statements that when you say those in the beginning of a meeting, what happens is it creates a visceral moment for people where that feeling when you're trying to focus on your work, but you've got email, Slack, things binging up on your screen, and it makes you feel like you can't relax because something feels uncertain, right? That's cortisol. Like, that's your brain telling you, I'm not safe here. I need to stay vigilant. And when you have to be in a meeting where your brain has to stay vigilant and pick up on all of the cues that are happening in that situation, um, you can't relax into your brain stays in that protected mode. And so comfort is what happens when clarity replaces that ambiguity and your brain finally says, okay, I can put my energy into this specific thing. You've told me this is how my input is going to shape this outcome. So I can just focus on that. And that actually takes your brain out of burning energy for self-protection, and it puts it into, okay, I know what I need to do to succeed here. And so it allows you to ease through friction and just have the mental capacity to perform what you already do naturally.
Right. And how long does it take our brains to process those three pieces and get into calm once
Well,
comfort is provided?
yeah, they actually say it's within 3 seconds.
3 seconds, right?
It takes 3 seconds to
This is
scan.
not a big like, so
No.
this is the other part. People say stuff like, "Oh, this is gonna take so much time." I was talking to a great mentor of mine yesterday, and he's built multiple billion-dollar companies internationally in scope, and one of the things he was telling me about yesterday, and I've heard this before from him, but he was sort of reiterating the importance of he did a town hall every single month, and and there was no time frame to the town hall. He said anybody could drop in. There was a queue. People could put their questions in a queue, and they could stay and listen, or they could come back. They'd be alerted when it was time for their question to come up, and they come up and they could ask the senior leadership team any question. And sometimes it would be a 2-hour conversation, and sometimes it would be an 8-hour conversation. And they promised to never leave until all the questions were answered. That was the deal. So people could be a fly on the wall if they wanted to. They didn't. And he said, we achieved great things. The company literally tripled in size through his leadership. They accomplished great things. And he said, that one meeting was the biggest reason for that. And I said, how much criticism did you get over the 8-hour meetings? He goes, tons. And I said, but they didn't understand that 8 hours was connection with 10,000 people. That's pretty high ROI. He goes, I know. It was amazing. And those are the kinds of things we can deploy even at scale, right?
Absolutely. And I think here's the thing, like, most of us don't realize that when comfort is missing, we've actually just normalized cortisol. Right?
Yeah.
We actually think, okay, this is just how work should feel. but your body knows, right? And so if you're constantly checking your phone, rereading emails 3 times before sending them, or you're super exhausted after your meetings, that should have actually energized you, because meetings, when you're driving towards something, a goal, they actually inspire people because they're providing inspiration for us to fulfill a goal. And so in those examples, when your nervous system is exhausted after them, that's your nervous system telling you something's off. That's not how it should be, right? And I think the problem is that we've normalized, hey, we're all in cortisol mode, so this is just how it is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's move to step 2, which comes from, and I think you got to build the comfort. Once you have the comfort, then you have step 2 is connection. And what's that about?
Yeah,
I mean, the word is obvious. Everybody understands connection. That's what we're here for. That's what we're doing this podcast. That's why people are listening to the podcast. So we understand what connection is, but I think you could go deeper here.
Yeah, so you've probably been on a team where everyone's polite, everyone does their job, but nobody really trusts anybody.
And when you see somebody struggling, they struggle in silence. Like everybody knows they're struggling, but they struggle in silence, right?
Totally. And so that's transactional relationships, right? You don't ask for help because you don't want to be too weak, and you don't offer help because you're not sure if it's welcome. And so all of these meetings and all of these, elements where you're working with someone. Remember that work is interdependent. You cannot work alone. It doesn't allow you to build and to achieve goals fast. Right? So when meetings feel like performances and everyone's guarded, that's what happens when connection is missing. And it means that you're working next to people, but you're not working with them. And so when belonging is present and when connection specifically is present, now this is where your team, someone will say something like, I'm really stuck on this. Can you take a look? And 3 people immediately jump up and they look at it and they support you. Or you're in a meeting where someone names another person's contribution publicly, right? This moved forward because of what Govind did. And you feel that warmth and there's that sense that we're in this together. That's actually where oxytocin is released. And that's your brain's bonding hormone. And so connection isn't about being nice or cordial. And that's what most people confuse. Connection is about building trust through reciprocity, through interdependence. So when that friction comes, you can navigate through it together instead of retreating into isolation and trying to figure it out on your own. The visceral moment that I often notice people talk about, and certainly in the qualitative research this was spoken about, it was statistically significant, but they talked about where you share an idea, and you're sharing an idea, and mid-sentence you're interrupted, and where you've finished speaking, and the conversation moves on like you didn't say a word. Right? This is where like the chest tightens, your back is, up against the wall, and you think, why bother? That's connection breakdown. But when someone says, hold on, I want to hear what you're saying, and the room goes quiet to listen, that's connection being built. Your brain registers, wait a second, my voice matters right now. I'm experiencing belonging. I'm experiencing connection. Somebody is actually doing the work to get to know what I'm trying to say. And so you've probably been in a relationship, at work, at home, with a friend even, where you can't put your finger on what's wrong, but something feels off. And, yeah, you're together, you're functional, but there's no real trust. And that's usually connection breaking down. And most people don't have language for it. And so they just kind of suffer through it or they leave.
And don't we, because when we don't have an answer for something,
Mhm.
I tend to say this a
Mhm.
lot, negative energy fills a void.
Totally.
So when there's a void of information, we fill it with negative energy, which is, I'm not important, this doesn't matter. And we've gotten so good at this, at 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 conflating meaning, to the point where, I think on things like this, on Zooms, on video conferences, it's all about
Mhm.
our eyes. So if we see eyes go to a place and we know what that place is, like a cell phone or a this or a that or a different distraction or a bing or a bloop that might show up somewhere else on your screen, very often it's that silent interruption. It's an interruption. It's a disregarding of what people are saying, isn't it?
Well, I
Like,
think we have to be careful about that one. And the reason for that is because neurodivergent people often don't look people in the eye. They often have to look up. They often look in different areas. I'm going to go back a couple of statements. So one of the things that you were talking about first was just looking at the element around, negativity and how negativity fills space. Well, our brains are actually wired for negativity. So we're 90% negative, 10% positive is typically the generalization, if you will, which means that we're going to have negative expectations of people right off the hop. So Govind, what you were talking about, if somebody is not looking directly into the camera or directly into a person, into a person's eyes, or they're looking somewhere else on their screen. Sometimes right? Sometimes it's very evident they're off in their own space. But I think we have to be careful because when it comes to neurodivergent people, and I certainly am so grateful for my children because both of them are neurodivergent, and our family makeup, expects everyone to look you in the eye, and that is, you're not going to get the best thinking or the best responses out of my kids if they have to look you in the eye. And so I think when we're looking at those elements, when we talk about connection breaking down, it's also getting to know someone well enough so that if you see them looking in a different direction, or you see them that, maybe they're not staring directly at the camera, you don't expect ill intent, that you actually look at it and go, okay, are they paying attention? Are they actually giving, great answers back to you? And I think that that's the difference. It's getting to know people. And you can't get to know people if you're just being kind, or if you're just being polite, or if you're just looking at that surface level interaction. You have to work to get to know someone, to build trust. And you have to be willing to also learn about them and get curious. And that's something that has really fallen off because of that negativity and that expectation of they just don't care.
yeah. And I think I want to be careful too. And I want to correct something I said. I think that there's a difference between, because I do it a lot too. I'll lose myself in thinking and I'll
Mhm.
look away from the screen. That's different than I think people can genuinely pick up when people are distracted, when they
Sure.
are reading something else
Sure.
other than in this conversation. My wife would tell me in a heartbeat that she knows the moment I have been sidelined by anything in a conversation with her. And it happens. It happened a lot more than it does now, but it certainly still happens. So so ab, so we've gone from comfort and talked about connection and talked about, you know building trust through repetition and reciprocity here. And next, we move to contribution. What do you mean by contribution?
Yeah. So let's talk. We're going to keep with this whole theme of like when it's not there. So when it's missing, you've probably worked on a project where, you've poured your energy into something. You've stayed late, or you've been thinking about it all weekend long, or you've just delivered something that, you worked for 40 hours on and you're super proud of it. And then nothing, no acknowledgement, no feedback. The work just kind of disappears into the void. And I would say we also saw this with sports teams. So practice players versus, starting line players, where if we're not acknowledging the people, our support people, then they don't actually understand why they matter. And so this is where you start to wonder, like, does this even matter? Does anyone even notice what I do? That feeling, that's your brain searching for dopamine and serotonin. So those are the two hormones or neurotransmitters that go with contribution. And, when you think of searching for a signal that your effort created impact and you don't get it, that is where the serotonin, it takes the motivation out, it drains you really fast, and it takes your foot off the gas and pumps the brake. So think about contribution as the indicator that not only it motivates and it mobilizes people. And when you aren't great at ensuring that everyone matters and acknowledging why they matter and why their work matters, this falls to the wayside. And this is where we get a lot of churn. Because here's the thing, this isn't about being a high performer or a low performer either. This is universal. So nobody operates in a silo. I've already said that. Everyone, whether it's the frontline worker, the admin assistant, the middle manager, the executive, everybody needs to know that they matter and that their work matters. So not just that they're busy, right? We've really misinterpreted busyness for mattering. And it's the mattering that actually creates that real impact. And when that signal is missing, people start going through the motions. They do what's required and nothing more, because why would you, right? So when contribution is present, now you think about a time when, someone said, this project succeeded because of what you brought to it. And maybe you weren't even the person creating it. Maybe you were just a person who made a comment. But that comment actually completely changed the direction. So if we're not listening to those comments, we actually can't catch where there is discrepancies early enough, right? So it could even just be, you saw work that was directly influencing a decision, or it solved a specific problem, or it helped somebody else move forward that actually needed to be able to move forward. So when that happens, your brain actually releases dopamine and you feel energized, right? You get a hit of dopamine. You actually want to contribute more. That's your brain saying, hey, what you do matters here. You're not just busy, you're actually creating value. And it doesn't have to be dramatic. This is
Shipping, billing, admin, payroll, marketing. You're managing all the things. So why waste time sending important documents the old-fashioned way? Mail and ship when you want, how you want with Stamps.com. Print postage on demand 24/7 and schedule pickups from your office or home. Save up to 90% with automated rate shopping. That's why over 1 million small businesses trust Stamps.com. Go to Stamps.com and use code PODCAST to try Stamps.com risk-free for 60 days.
Ensuring that when reports go out, they have all the contributing names on them. This is, making sure that, when something is done well, it's a manager saying your report helped us make that call. Or the colleague saying, I couldn't have finished this without you. Thank you so much for helping me. Those moments, they're the moments that tell your brain you're not invisible, your work has impact, right?
Right. And look, so I'm a big fan of writing notes, and I know you are too, because I got a beautiful note from you and a beautiful card. But it doesn't have to be that. It can be something smaller. It can be something similar. As simple. It can be just a recognition. Hey, I see you and you mattered, and you
Totally.
really, you participated in this, and I appreciate your participation. Right?
Totally. It can be a Friday Teams message or Slack message. Really appreciate everything you did this week. Thank you.
Yeah. Bad news doesn't have to arrive on Friday. A little shout out can too, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Okay. So we go from contribution, and I'm leaving out. There's a binder all the way through this. I'm leaving that out because I want to come back to it in a second after we get through the last piece. But psychological safety. Why is that the next step?
Yeah, so psychological safety, I mean, there's been billions
And
of
it's the only
dollars.
one that doesn't start with C so far, by the way, but that's okay.
Yeah, the psychological safety is 1/5 of belonging, and yet psychological safety was really, $1 billion spend on training and development. So yes, you need it. You've all, felt this where you've been in a space where you noticed a mistake in a plan or in a presentation, or you saw it can be as simple as like a spelling mistake, but something that could have caused real problems down the line, but you don't say anything. And the reason we stop talking, the reason we stop offering, the reason we stop raising concerns is likely because that person either got defensive, doubled down, or you were labeled in a negative way. So you're not a team player. So there's kind of those two elements. And so when people see this, and it doesn't even have to be directed towards the individual who is pointing it out, if they watch somebody else experience that, then that tells everybody else, stay quiet. Don't speak up here. And that flawed plan will move forward. And you think, well, I at one point tried. And that silence, that's really what happens when psychological safety is missing. So people self-censoring, think of that. That is what happens when there's no psychological safety. And it's not because they don't care either. It's because speaking up is way more dangerous than staying silent. So imagine instead, though, that you have this leader who responds to your concern with, tell me more. Like, what am I missing here? And they lean in with curiosity instead of defensiveness. So Govind, when you were initially talking about your one colleague or friend that did those really long town halls, I guarantee that these were questions that they were likely using. Tell me more. What am I missing? They didn't get defensive. They wanted to learn more. They wanted to get curious. Now, the other thing about psychological safety is you can get curious and you can have all of this information come towards you. The problem is that most people, when they receive feedback, they don't actually close the loop. So if you don't close the loop, and what I mean by that is last week, someone raised a concern about X, and here's what we either did about it, or here's what maybe we can't do about it, but we're looking at doing. Here's what the plan is. Suddenly, if that loop isn't closed, then the challenge becomes dangerous. When the loop is closed, it's valued, and all of a sudden the danger of speaking up is taken away. So your brain is shifting from this threat scanning to open exploration. And you start contributing these authentic perspectives instead of the safe ones that so-and-so, responds well to, right? That's psychological safety. That's where you're not eliminating conflict. It's where conflict becomes productive. And so it protects people while they're going through challenge or while they're going through dissent or differences.
And you really talk about this as being the essential ingredient to people putting in, and you say willing to speak, try, admit, and challenge. But I sort of simplify this to willing to put in an effort, like because we know that we might not be great at something, but we have something to give, and if everybody's giving something, that's better than nothing, and people are willing to give it a shot if they have the safety that they know that they're not going to get lambasted for it. They're not going to be called out for it. There's no social punishment coming out the other end of it. When people are met with curiosity and wonder, it goes a lot farther, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that fear of social punishment is often what stops us from providing any sort of feedback or voicing anything.
Can I ask you this? Because I see this a lot in teams where, and I mean athletic teams and business teams, where somebody who is coming along and they know they're not very good at something. They know that they may not be, they're a C player, they're a role player. They don't have the talent of the top line people. they also know when people are pumping their tires falsely. Is that a form of social punishment?
Um, well, I would say it's actually there's kind of twofold to that. It resides in both contribution and psychological safety. And the reason for it is that we cannot get better unless we make mistakes and fail. That is simply how we learn. And so when you have teams, and this totally depends on what the manager or the leader or whoever is driving the project. If there is no room for learning and growth, then people will not want to make a mistake. And what's fascinating, I'm going to go back to Laurier for just a second. So it was my son's first year on the team. He was recruited by 12 universities to play football. And in each of the universities that we went to, what I said to him was this: you can get a degree anywhere in Canada. Find the team where you know they're going to accept you even if you fail, even if you do badly, even if you can't show up. Now, he was a first string player. He's all university teams grade people. Okay. AAA ball, grade, you get a grade after every game, after every practice. It's the same as performance reviews, okay? Here's the thing. He went from, getting 80s to literally, when he went into training camp, there were times that he had 16%. There was one time that he actually said to the coach, you know what? I failed so badly, I deserve 0%. And then he went into the scrimmage and he beat some of the veterans. And do you want to know what those veterans said to him?
Mm.
They were like, man, see, all you needed to do was keep going. We knew you were going to get it. And you persevered. Like, you did it. You showed up. You kept going. We're so happy you kept going, Logan. And if we don't have the room for that, and if we use it from a organizational lens, if we don't have the room to test things short term, then what happens with those A performers is they get frustrated with the C performers really quickly because they feel that it slows them down. Rather than understanding, okay, wait a second, in me teaching you, I'm actually gaining more. I'm learning as I'm going. And if I can teach this, this becomes innate nature. And most people on teams miss that element. And so they miss the element of the 50-50 contribution. I'm always learning. I'm always giving and growing. And so does the C player, or so does the rookie player. And so I think that element, and it's backed by the research as well, is that, yes, that's contribution, but yes, it's also psychological safety, because you have to set the environment up so people can try things and fail.
That's amazing. And the fifth pillar here is well-being.
Mm-hmm. Well-being's one of my favorites because, and I shouldn't say it like that. It's one of my favorites right now because it makes me laugh when organizations are like, hey, we're going to give you this resilience training, or here, we're going to give you this app. Go figure out how to bounce back, okay? And then you have the manager that's sending you the email at 11 p.m. and expecting a response by 7 a.m. And you're like, okay, so we know that resilience is not a solo sport, right? We know that we can't bounce back without other people, right? All of the research on Hurricane Katrina or, any of the national disasters, who are the people that bounce back fast? The people that have community, who are showing up for each other and creating conditions to help other people bounce back fast. And so we've set this up really backwards, where we're saying to people, if you can't be resilient, it's 100% on you and you're the bad person. And so what this does is, you start working through lunches, you skip your breaks, you stay every night exhausted. You tell yourself, this is just the busy season. How often have we said, this is just the busy season, it'll settle down? But that busy season, it never ends. right? So that exhaustion, your sleep, I can't believe how many podcasts there are on how to sleep better, which I think is important. But I also think people aren't sleeping better because their communities and their environments that they're in every day aren't set up to actually allow you to go to bed at night and rest your head on the pillow without thinking about who's going to be demanding you at 7 a.m. the next morning. So when we don't have these structures in places, you're irritable with your family. You have a reactive demeanor to you because your brain just isn't thinking well. So this is what happens when well-being is missing. Your nervous system never gets time to recover, and people run on fumes, and eventually something breaks. And so unless you have somebody who's building infrastructure for well-being, so a leader that says, before I assign this, what's your current workload? Or, making sure that meetings end on time every time. Or somebody who's taking their vacation days and telling the team, I'm fully unplugging. This is important. And that message of, yes, you are fully unplugging. Do not look at your emails while you were away. We will figure this out while you're gone. Those boundaries have to be modeled. And I think in a lot of ways, people need to feel permission to protect their own capacity so that it's okay to take a break, that it's okay to disconnect after work, and that the disconnection after work is actually what sets you up for success the next day, so that you can come back, more focused, more creative, more engaged. That's well-being. That's sustainable well-being. It's not about avoiding hard work. It's about creating sustainable performance through stress and recovery cycles.
I really like when you said protect your own capacity. I think that's a really powerful thing. Now, the other thing that I really like about your belonging diagram through comfort, connection, contribution, psych safety, and well-being is underneath it, you have essentially different impacts to friction for each one of those things. And here's the thing that I think is really interesting about this. I spent a long time in tech, and one of the things we wanted to do is always make it frictionless adoption of technology, friction. And it becomes this sort of like catchphrase that everybody sort of takes over, and it means everything to everything. But challenge builds character. Failures are how we lose. And friction is how we grow and how we create momentum. And in this wheel, you've got friction all the way around it, but friction shows up in different ways as we move through the model. So let's talk about that, right? So comfort calms and eases friction, but connection bonds, and there's trust in friction. And then you go contribution activates and motivates and moves through friction. Psych safety protects through friction, and well-being renews, and you recover, stay engaged through friction. So what are you saying?
Yeah. So we've really optimized to take friction out of things, just like what you talked about, and so when we look at that, we now live in society and culture where conflict or friction is the first indicator to opt out, to cancel something, to negate someone, to defend, to double down. And what we know is that, volatility doesn't break people, right? Volatility is going to test the strength of your infrastructure. And when people as a whole don't understand belonging, that's when working becomes trauma. And when people navigate change, friction, challenge productivity, instead of defaulting into that kind of fight, flight, freeze, detach, it actually maps out how we can sustain and build and grow together. So we can't optimize friction or conflict out. We actually need to optimize how we work through it. And so if you look at those indicators, the reason that comfort calms is because it's actually taking, that predictability and clearness and clarity allows your brain to be at ease despite the fact that friction or conflict is there, right? Connection, if you have that bond that is not built on transaction, but it's built on respect and it's built on, knowing that that person is empathetic and knows you and you know them, that means that you can trust them to have your back and they can trust you to have theirs, even when you're in a crisis. And we don't have a lot of environments where that is true anymore. So we actually have to learn how to bring those factors back in so that when we're in crisis, when we're in environments where that volatility or that conflict is so great, that we're showing up so that we can get into that contribution and be motivated and be inspired and be ready to put, the foot on the gas and know that you as an individual, regardless of what your position is, you matter. Right. So I started mapping these 5 indicators: comfort, connection, contribution, psych safety, and well-being, and testing them with thousands of employees. And what I found really at first was that most people can feel when belonging is breaking down, but they don't have language for it. And so they know something's off, but they can't name it. And because they can't name it, they can't fix it. And so they either suffer through it or they leave. And I think that's the piece that when you look at how we move through things, this is where that changes how we show up and what we give and what we receive. When tragedy of somebody leaving, somebody really amazing leaving that could have been fixable doesn't happen anymore. And that means that we have to look at how that 50% is breaking down. So where's my 50% breaking down? Where's your 50% breaking down? And then knowing which indicator it's actually breaking down in so we can have a real conversation and we can actually respond to that feedback with curiosity and not defensiveness. And I think what I've then seen.
Shipping, billing, admin, payroll, marketing. You're managing all the things, so why waste time sending important documents the old-fashioned way? Mail and ship when you want, how you want with Stamps.com. Print postage on demand 24/7 and schedule pickups from your office or home. Save up to 90% with automated rate shopping. That's why over 1 million small businesses trust Stamps.com. Go to Stamps.com and use code PODCAST to try Stamps.com risk-free for 60 days.
Since is that when we start doing that, it completely changes engagement. It changes retention. We're looking at, 24% increases, 28% increases, because we have language. And it's not language that's triggering language. It's language that allows us to really understand, where is it that I'm breaking down? Here's what I own. I'm going to own this. I'm going to say, hey, this is mine. And here's what I need from you, because this is where this piece of this belonging element, I need you to know where I'm going to be there for you and have your back.
Yeah. So I want to come back full circle, right? Because we talked, and this is the thing that I think is really important that people understand. We talked at the beginning about DEI and idea what it's called here in Canada. And we talked about that being the beginning of your journey into belonging. But when I go through this has nothing to do about diversity, equity, inclusion, or accessibility. This is about people being recognized, seen, being comfortable to participate, connected to their teams, able to see that what they have to contribute, what they have to say matters, and that if they get it wrong, they're not going to get assassinated for it. And oh, by the way, go away at the end of the day and recharge your batteries. Like, that's important too. this just sounds like a pretty good template for life and business and leadership, doesn't it? Like, it's kind of simple. I mean, right? Am I missing something?
No, I'm laughing not because it is simple. It had to be made simple. The iteration of where we started to where this is today, and the reason for the simplicity is really because things that um, are easy are things that we adopt and we can change. And one of the reasons that DEI and IDEA was failing and was creating polarization was that it became difficult and it became to a place where people felt they couldn't speak up. And that no matter what you said, I heard this a lot, no matter what we say, we're wrong. We're going to be blamed. And so I think this is not DEI. And I think that's one of the things that I really, speak to often is that belonging is the infrastructure so that people can feel good about being in the environment and they are fulfilled by the work that they're doing. And, when the infrastructure is there, that's when engagement, speed, quality, innovation, retention, all of those things come in.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that we recognize that you don't have to be a professional athlete to pick this stuff up. You don't have to be a woman. You don't have to be ethnically diverse or gender diverse. You don't have to be outside of the norm to pick up these kinds of tools and use them with your peers today, because this is the way that we lean into each other, and this is the way we get more out of all of our relationships, both in and out of work, right? I mean, this applies just as much at home, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it all spills into each other, whether that's your home life, your community, or your work that you're doing, regardless of what that work looks like. So it really is one of those things where I think people always talk about the fact that we want to keep those elements separate. But the reality is that your brain doesn't separate them. Everything that you experience either adds layers of protection and layers of trauma, or it takes layers of protection off so that you can be at your best self. And that's where the environment creates you as much as you create the environment. And we have to keep that in mind as we navigate, the future and what is happening now in our world.
Yeah, very, very good point to stop. This is the point of the conversation where, obviously, thank you for joining me, Andrea. This was a phenomenal conversation, and there's so much wealth of information here. And we evoke a great gift that we got about 11 years ago from a great friend of the show, John Rulin, who left us too early. He suddenly passed about a year and a bit ago. And ever since then, we've been paying forward his gift to us, which was a paper napkin that said, "What you appreciate appreciates." When you appreciate someone, they appreciate not only for you and in the community and the connection and the bonds and the contribution that you are making together, but also to everyone around you. So who would you like to appreciate today?
Well, the first and foremost is going to be my husband. And the reason for that is he has been an athlete his entire life. We met when we were 18 and 19. So we've been together for 30 years. And without him, I don't know that I would have gone as deep into this work. For a couple of reasons. A, he gave me the background of the sports element and always put my work forward and really supported me. And B, allowed me to dig into what was going on with our kids to understand how that was also shaping and forming what was happening with my research. And then, if you go onto my LinkedIn profile, you will always see him popping up on my posts. He is forever my biggest champion. And I think in the world today, it's really easy to underappreciate your champions and denote them as, oh, it's just the husband, or it's just the partner, or it's just the friend. And I think they're the people that we have to really celebrate the most, because they're the people that challenge us, that make us look at things differently, and that really force us to keep going even when things are really hard.
That's beautiful. And does your husband have a name other than Andrea's husband?
Andrew. So we're Andrew and Andrea Carter.
That's right. Thanks for joining me, Andrea.
Thank you so much for having me, Govind.
Andrea, thanks so much for joining me on this conversation in Paper Napkin Wisdom today. I think our conversation brought something powerful to life. The idea that belonging isn't just a feeling, it's infrastructure. And when you think about the napkin that Andrea shared, you can start to see how this elegant framework really works. Because belonging isn't something vague or abstract. It's something that shows up in 5 very real indicators that you can measure. Comfort, where clarity and predictability calm the nervous system so that people can think clearly. Connection, where trust and reciprocity allow people to move through challenges together. Contribution, where people know their work matters and effort creates real impact. Psychological safety, where people are willing to speak up, try, admit, and challenge ideas without fear. And well-being, where sustainable performance becomes possible through recovery and renewal. And what I love about Andrea's model is that it reframes something we often misunderstand. Because the goal isn't to eliminate friction. Friction, challenge, growth, disagreement, and learning is all part of progress. And friction is needed to create momentum. So the real question is whether the environment we create allows people to move through that friction together or not. And when belonging exists, comfort eases friction. Connection builds trust in friction. Contribution moves people through friction. Psychological safety protects people through friction, and well-being renews people after friction. That's not soft leadership. That's performance infrastructure. So here's a thought to sit with as you leave this conversation. Think about the environments you create. Whether that's in your team, your organization, your community, or even your family, and ask yourself, where might one of those 5 indicators be missing? Where could a little more comfort, connection, contribution, safety, or well-being unlock potential in people around you? Because where belonging exists, people don't just work harder, they become more of who they are capable of being. And that's where extraordinary things start to happen. So, thanks for listening to Paper Napkin Wisdom. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, rate, and most importantly, share it with someone who might benefit from this conversation. And here's the challenge for this week. Take one idea from today's episode, just one, and write it down on a paper napkin and share it with the world using the hashtag Paper Napkin Wisdom. Because sometimes the smallest ideas written into the simple places can lead to the biggest results. Until next time, keep learning, keep sharing, and keep turning small ideas into big results, and make it a great day.